All right, so next, let's take a quick look at macronutrients, micronutrients, and water. Okay. So macronutrients, the term macro means large, and so this category of nutrients are what make up a majority of the mass of our food. These are very large molecules, and they are making up 99% of the food that you're consuming. And so these macronutrients are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And a lot of time throughout this course, you're going to see fats, sometimes you're going to see lipids, but those are essentially the same thing. We just kind of split the terminology back and forth. So carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. These macronutrients are what are providing the energy and building blocks that we talked about earlier. So all of the calories that you're using to fuel your body, all of the molecules that you've used to build up these cells and these structures, those are all different carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. We need these in large amounts, and so they are measured in this relatively large unit of measurement, grams. And our bodies are going to break down the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins that you're eating, and then rebuild those into different carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, or we'll break them down even further so that we can access them for energy. So this is just a quick look at some of that macromolecular composition of food. So something like a grain is heavily made up of carbohydrates, but does also contain a little bit of protein and fats, especially if this is a whole grain like brown rice, whereas a processed refined grain like white rice would basically be all carbohydrate. Most vegetables are going to have a decent split of all three macronutrients, but then we do have some more processed foods, which are where we're going to start seeing these essentially like pure fat, pure carbohydrate. There's very little examples of pure protein, but essentially the more processing you do to a food, the more stripping away of nutrients that it comes with it. So something like butter and oil, these are processed fats. Um, they are just basically 100% fat. Meat is almost entirely protein and fats, and depending on what type of meat you're consuming and whether that was free range or was raised in a CAFO, and obviously we get lots of different fat percentages looking in the grocery store, that's going to determine how much of that is protein versus fat. But a lot of your meats are higher in fat than you would necessarily expect. We typically associate meat with protein, but that's not always the case. So carbohydrates. Again, this is what are more commonly referred to as sugars. So anything that you can think of as a sugar, anything that tastes sweet, even though not all carbohydrates are sweet, those are all carbs. This is likely the most common macronutrient. It's used for a lot of structural things. It is the main energy source used by all living things, especially during activity. And it is composed of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So a very basic molecule made up of very basic elements. And it is always in this 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. That is a defining factor of carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are water soluble. This is a concept that's going to come up more and more as we move throughout the course and is going to be really important understanding where these molecules are in our body and how they move throughout our body. These carbohydrates are water soluble. That means that they can dissolve in water, which is also what this term hydrophilic means. So we'll go more into that later, but carbohydrates, water soluble, they are composed of these monomers called monosaccharides. Saccharide is a root word that means sugar. Mono is a prefix that means one. So a monosaccharide is one sugar. And you may have heard these referred to as simple sugars. These are things like glucose and fructose. So if you've heard of high fructose corn syrup, that is a sweetener that is made up of pure monosaccharide, of pure fructose. And like we mentioned earlier, carbohydrates have a energy density of 4 kilocalories per gram. So every gram of carbohydrate provides your body with 4 kilocalories on average. So these are most common in plants, any whole food, grains, fruits, veggies. Lipids, aka our fats and oils, these are also an important energy source. This is what your body or what most living things rely on for energy when they are at rest, right? So fats are very energy dense, right? They have much more energy per gram than carbohydrates and proteins, but they also take a lot more steps to break down. And so they're really only used as energy when we have a lot of time to do that. When we are active, when we need fast energy, that's when we start switching to carbohydrates. So anyways, lipids are our main energy source at rest, along with a variety of other functions they play in the body. Fats are important. They are often villainized in the nutrition world, but fats are very, very important for your health. So you do not need to avoid fat. You just need to avoid certain types and limit other types. And we'll talk about that throughout the course later. Lipids are also composed of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They just have much less oxygen in their structure, and this makes them fat soluble instead of water soluble. So lipids do not interact or bond with water. They cannot dissolve in water, and that is why they are called hydrophobic, afraid of water. And so other molecules are either going to be described as water soluble or fat soluble. And essentially, that is going to be that differentiation, whether it is water or fat soluble, plays a huge role in where it is in our body, how we digest it, how we absorb it, how we transport it. Okay? So this is a very important concept that we'll talk more about much later. So whereas carbohydrates were composed of monosaccharides, lipids have a bit more complex structure. They basically have these two separate parts. Like you see in this image here, we have these little blue glycerol heads, and then we have these long, wiggly fatty acid tails. So most of a lipid is composed of that tail, and then these heads are just a small portion. Um, and so lipids are going to be coming mainly from oils, butters, dairy products. There are lots of plant sources of fats, of healthy fats, like legumes. And then again, like as we mentioned in a previous slide, meat often comes with a lot of fat. Proteins. Proteins are a lot more than just muscle. Proteins do everything for the cell, and we're going to get more into that later. But because they have so many different roles, so many different functions, because they do so many different things, our body only uses them for energy if we've run out of everything else, basically. So proteins are our last resort as an energy source. They are also composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they also have this fourth element in their structure, nitrogen. And that's going to give them a very different structure and chemical interactions compared to the other two. Proteins are composed of lots of different types of amino acids, which gives them lots of variability in their chemical structure and composition. So some proteins are water soluble, some proteins are fat soluble. It's going to depend. So we get a mix here. And just like with carbohydrates, proteins provide 4 kilocalories per gram. And some examples, meat, legumes like soy, lentils, peanuts. There are some leafy vegetables that are high in protein like spinach, kale, etc. And so some key pieces of information I've organized for you here in this table. So things that are going to come up later, its ability to dissolve in water is going to be really important. What it's made of, these are the monomers. So monomer is a term that refers to a building block, essentially. So all of these foods are going to be digested into their monomers after we eat them in order to be absorbed. Their energy density, that's going to come up a lot in this class. And then if they're used for energy, when. Right? These are all the key concepts about macronutrients that you're going to need reference to starting now. All right. And so now that we have dove a bit deeper into the specificity of these macronutrients, we can now apply that idea of energy density from earlier and use that to calculate the total amount of calories in a given piece of food or in a given meal if we know the amount of macronutrient in that meal. So we know that carbohydrates and proteins both provide 4 kilocalories per gram, and we know that fat provides 9 kilocalories per gram. So we have 16 grams of carbohydrate, 9 grams of fat, and 7 grams of protein. We just need to multiply those numbers and then add the total amount of calories together, and that'll give us the total amount of energy from this meal. So go ahead and pause here and do those calculations, and then I'll show you the math on the next slide. All right. So again, carbs and protein give 4 kilocalories per gram. So if we're consuming 16 grams of carbohydrate, we multiply 16 by 4. That gives us 64 kilocalories from carbs. If we're eating 7 grams of protein, we do 7 times 4. That gives us 28 kilocalories from protein. And then we just do the same thing with fat. but fat has more energy per gram. It has this 9 kilocalorie per gram energy density. So 9 times 9 gives us 81. And if we add up those three values, altogether, this one slice of bread with 1 tablespoon of peanut butter is going to provide 173 kilocalories. So boom, that's how we use these energy densities. Okay, this went a little bit longer than I was thinking, so I am going to stop this and do a separate video for micronutrients in water. I'll see you in the next one.